Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jaya Mudiraye. So since yesterday was Mokshada Ekadashi or Vaikuntha Ekadashi, as it is known in South India, perhaps the most important Ekadashi in the year, which is the day of appearance of Bhagavad Gita, I was asked to speak a little bit on the glories of Bhagavad Gita for today's class. And of course, you know, you can speak about the glories of Bhagavad Gita for half an hour or for 1 hour and feel that you exhausted the topic. And this is an inexhaustible topic. But with your blessings, and I feel that you're very generous here, so please give me your blessings to say something worthwhile. I'll try to touch a little bit about the essence of Bhagavad Gita, about the meaning of Bhagavad Gita, what we have to actually derive by studying, reading, distributing Bhagavad Gita. What is the result? How do we know whether our studying of Bhagavad Gita is successful or not? Because so many people study Bhagavad Gita, read Bhagavad Gita daily. I know one person, he lives in Govardhan town, near Govardhan Hill. He reads the entire Bhagavad Gita every day, all 700 verses. He's an old man, Sanskrit scholar. But how do we know if our reading of Bhagavad Gita, studying of Bhagavad Gita, or even distributing of Bhagavad Gita has become successful? Whether we imbibe the spirit of Bhagavad Gita and manifest this spirit externally and internally or not. So that will be the topic of my class, and to start, I will start with an unusual Mangala Charana. The Mangala Charana for Bhagavad Gita is the verse spoken by Dhritarashtra. That's the first verse of Bhagavad Gita, the only verse which is spoken by Dhritarashtra. And as some acharyas explain, this particular verse serves in a very paradoxical way as Mangala Charana for the whole book, or the auspicious invocation, which prepares us to understand what is there, what is the essence of this very important book of Vedic knowledge. So please repeat, you probably all know this verse. Dhritarashtra Uvacha Dharmakshetre Kurukshetre Samavetaya Yutsavaha Mamakah Pandavaschaiva Kimakurvata Sanjaya Dhritarashtra Uvacha Dharmakshetre Kurukshetre Samavetaya Yutsavaha Mamakah Pandavaschaiva Kimakurvata Sanjaya. So translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Dhritarashtra said, O Sanjaya, after my sons and the sons of Pandu assembled in the place of pilgrimage at Kurukshetra, desiring to fight, what did they do? Purport. Bhagavad Gita is a widely read theistic science summarized in the Gita Mahatmya, glorification of the Gita. There it says that one should read Bhagavad Gita very scrutinizingly with the help of a person who is a devotee of Sri Krishna and try to understand it without personally motivated interpretations. The example of clear understanding is there in the Bhagavad Gita itself, in the way the teaching is understood by Arjuna, who heard the Bhagavad Gita directly from the Lord. If someone is fortunate enough to understand the Bhagavad Gita in that line of disciplic succession without motivated interpretation, then he surpasses all studies of Vedic wisdom and all scriptures of the world. One will find in the Bhagavad Gita all that is contained in other scriptures, but the reader will also find things which are not to be found elsewhere. That is the specific standard of the Gita. It is the perfect theistic science because it is directly spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, Lord Sri Krishna. The topics discussed by Dhritarashtra and Sanjaya, as described in the Mahabharata, form the basic principle of this great philosophy. It is understood that this philosophy evolved on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, which is a sacred place of pilgrimage, from the immemorial time of the Vedic age. It was spoken by the Lord when He was present personally on this planet for the guidance of mankind. The word Dharma Kshetra is place where religious rituals are performed is significant because on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, the Supreme Personality of Godhead was present on the side of Arjuna. Dhritarashtra, the father of the Kurus, was highly doubtful about the possibility of his son's ultimate victory. In his doubt, he inquired from his secretary Sanjaya, what did they do? He was confident that both his sons and the sons of younger brother Pandu, were assembled in that field of Kurukshetra for a determined engagement of the war. Still, his inquiry is significant. He did not want a compromise between the cousins and brothers, and he wanted to be sure of the fate of his sons on the battlefield. Because the battle was arranged to be fought at Kurukshetra, which is mentioned elsewhere in the Vedas as the place of worship, even for the denizens of heaven, Dhritarashtra became very fearful about the influence of the holy place on the outcome of the battle. He knew very well that this would influence Arjuna and the sons of Pandu favorably because by nature they were all virtuous. Sanjaya was a student of Vyasa, and therefore by mercy of Vyasa, Sanjaya was able to envision the battlefield of Kurukshetra even while he was in the room of Dhritarashtra. And so Dhritarashtra asked him about the situation on the battlefield. Both the Pandavas and the sons of Dhritarashtra belong to the same family, but Dhritarashtra's mind is disclosed herein. He deliberately claimed only his sons as Kurus, and he separated the sons of Pandu from the family heritage. One can thus understand the specific position of Dhritarashtra in his relationship with his nephews and sons of Pandu. As in the paddy field, the unnecessary plants are taken out, so it is expected from the very beginning of these topics that in the religious field of Kurukshetra, where the father of religion, Sri Krishna, was present, the unwanted plants like Dhritarashtra's son, Duryodhana, and others would be wiped out, and the thoroughly religious persons headed by Yudhishthira would be established by the Lord. This is the significance of the words Dharmakshetre and Kurukshetre, apart from their historical and Vedic importance. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Dhritarashtra uvacha Dharmakshetre Kurukshetre samaveta yuyutsavaha mamakah pandavaschaiva kima kurvata Sanjaya. Dhritarashtra said, O Sanjay, after my sons and the sons of Pandu assembled in the place of pilgrimage at Kurukshetra, desiring to fight, what did they do? Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Namashristam Manamapi Sachiputram Atra Svarupam Rupam Tasyagrajam Rupurim Madhurim Goshtavatim Radha Kunda Girivaramaho Radhika Madhavasam Prapto Yasya Pratita Kripaya Shri Gurum Tam Natosmi Yantah Pravishya Mama Vachim Mam Prasuptam Sanjivayata Kila Shakti Darak Svadhamna Anyamscha Hasta Charana Shravanatva Gadim Pranannamo Bhagavate Purushaya Tubhyam Swasyastu Vishwasya Kalak Prasidatam Dayantu Bhutani Shivam Mithodya Manascha Badram Bhajata Tadoksache Aveshyatam No Matir Adhyaitu Ki. So, Srila Prabhupada called his version of Bhagavad Gita as it is, quite proudly. Bhagavad Gita Yatharup in Hindi. And he explains why he's calling his version of Bhagavad Gita as it is. He has complete reason. He has all reasons to do it. And he explains that why he did this, because the original intention of the author of Bhagavad Gita is very diligently and faithfully presented in the book. The original intention of the author of Bhagavad Gita is to create faith in our hearts. That is very important thing. And Prabhupada's version of Bhagavad Gita is an amazingly powerful tool of creating faith in the words of Krishna and in Vedic culture. There is no other parallel in the history of humanity, of this one book which would really transform so many people's heart. So Prabhupada definitely has this reason, and he says that those who are fortunate enough to understand Bhagavad Gita as it is, in this purport which we read, those who are fortunate enough to understand Bhagavad Gita as Arjuna understood it, without any personal motivated interpretations, these people will understand the essence of all the Vedas. And this is a very, not a small claim. It's a huge claim to say that just by reading these 700 verses, you will understand the essence of the whole Vedic literature. But there is a condition. You have to do it without any personal motivation. So many versions of Bhagavad Gita, as Prabhupada himself says in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita, have been published even before Bhagavad Gita as it is, and even after Bhagavad Gita as it is. But hardly any of this, as Prabhupada himself says, really creates the faith in people's heart. Some versions of Bhagavad Gita, very intellectually stimulating. You can read this and you can enjoy the intellectual, way of thought. Some versions of Bhagavad Gita are inspiring some other ideas within your heart. But hardly any other version of Bhagavad Gita really does what Krishna wants to do. Once I was speaking with Indian ambassador to Russia in Moscow. He was a very learned person. He was from Brahminical background, as his family was very clear about this. He was Mr. Shukla. In a conversation with myself, he started criticizing Gandhi's interpretation of Bhagavad Gita. He was saying this Gandhi, he completely misunderstood Bhagavad Gita because he was trying to say that Bhagavad Gita about non-violence. How is it possible that Krishna is always telling Arjuna, you fight, you fight, you fight, and Gandhi comes and says, actually the whole idea of Bhagavad Gita is not to fight. I said, yeah, I completely agree, but what Bhagavad Gita is all about according to your view? And he said, yes, of course, it's very clear. The main idea of Bhagavad Gita is to fight for our mother, for our country. So he was criticizing Gandhi for misrepresenting the idea of Bhagavad Gita, but he himself also had very distorted, Bhagavad Gita is not a patriotic book of some nationalistic idea, let's fight for our motherland or whatever. And therefore, Prabhupada, when he says this, it's very rare to meet somebody who really understands Bhagavad Gita as it is. But Prabhupada really facilitated our understanding by understanding Bhagavad Gita himself and imbibing the spirit of Bhagavad Gita. And as the last verse of Bhagavad Gita, spoken by Krishna, suggests, Sarva dharman parityajam ekam sharanam vrajaham tvam sarva papibhyo mokshashyami ma suchaha. And actually, when he said this, that the purpose of Bhagavad Gita is to instigate you to fight for the cause of your nation, I said, how is that possible if the very last verse of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Sarva dharman parityajam ekam sharanam vraja, you just give up all the dharmas, including your, motherland dharma and all other ideas like this, and just surrender unto me. And he says, really? He said this? He couldn't believe it. He said, I will read it again. So this little story illustrates how easy it is to read Bhagavad Gita and completely miss the point. Because what we do when we read Bhagavad Gita, this is what we do when we read any other book. We impose our own ideas on the text. We filter out the ideas through our false ego, and whatever comes through the false ego, through the holes in the false ego, that's how we understood. And which something doesn't fit with our ideas, we will never be able to understand. But Srila Prabhupada, he is very, very meticulously bringing us to this proper understanding of Bhagavad Gita. And the proper understanding of Bhagavad Gita is expressed in this last verse, Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. And this verse, as Prabhupada explains in the purport, is the, is the definition or explanation of surrender. And surrender, what is surrender? Surrender actually is surrender to the will of the Lord. Our desire to follow the Supreme Lord as properly as possible, and feeling the protection of the Supreme Lord. So surrender is actually the external sign of faith. This is what Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains in Amnaya Sutra, that that Sharanapati is the Lakshana of Shraddha. Shraddha is a certain function of our mind, certain vritti, how to say this, how to translate it into English, certain vritti, certain form of our consciousness, of our heart, which tends to reject any other upayas. There's no other upaya but Sharanagati, but to surrender of the Lord. We in this material world, we are trying to find some other means of salvation. We're all desperately seeking some protection in this material world. We want to feel this security, and we want to feel that we are safe. And ultimately, the ultimate conclusion of this search is when we come to understand that the only one who can protect us is the Supreme Lord Himself. And therefore, to gain this secure situation in this insecure world, we really have to surrender to Him. If we surrender to His will, we feel protected, as much as Arjuna feels protected during this severe, fierce battle of Kurukshetra. Arjuna always felt protected. And, there was this little episode when Ghatotkacha was killed, when Karna, by the instigation of, Karna had to use a very precious weapon which he had, Shakti weapon, which was given to him by Suryadev himself. And the benediction of Karna at that time, when he was given this weapon, Shakti weapon, that, he can use it only once. But against whomever he would use this weapon, he will kill this person. And Karna knew about this benediction, and he definitely wanted to use this weapon against Arjuna, because Arjuna was his archenemy and the most powerful fighter on the other side. So Krishna, he arranged the whole, drama, and he instigated Bhima's son, Ghatotkacha, to fight very violently and ultimately Ghatotkacha was killing, hundreds and thousands of Kuru soldiers, of the fighters of Duryodhana. And Duryodhana, he became very impassioned, and he said, Karna, you have to use your Shakti weapon against this Ghatotkacha. And Karna was forced to basically waste his Shakti weapon against Ghatotkacha. And when he did it, and of course Ghatotkacha was killed at that time, Krishna said, "Oof, such a relief." he was there with Arjuna and he said, "Arjuna, you can't understand how worried I was all this time. Ever since Karna became the fighter on this battlefield, I knew that he would use the Shakti weapon against you and you would be finished. There was no chance for you not to be finished. So I arranged this whole drama and this whole thing, to force Karna to use Shakti weapon against somebody else. And now I'm very relieved." So, the point of this beautiful story is that when you surrender to the Lord as Arjuna was, you don't have to worry yourself. He will worry about it. All your anxieties goes directly to Him. There is no need for you to be concerned or to be worried about yourself because you're surrendered. You did your part. The rest is His responsibility. You don't have to do it, You're doing what you're supposed to do, and Krishna will surely do what He's supposed to do, as He shows in this. He was, He said, ever since Karna is fighting, I was planning how to, it was very difficult for me to figure it out, how to do this. So that's a beautiful point. And again, this is the main point of Bhagavad Gita. The main point of Bhagavad Gita is to help us to understand that the only thing which we should do is to surrender. Anya upaya, all other upayas, all other means of salvation, all other means of improving our condition in this world should be rejected because they ultimately not work. They ultimately bring about the opposite result. But this is the only real means of gaining the secure situation in this material world. And therefore, Krishna finishes Bhagavad Gita with this verse, Sarva dharman parityaja mamakam sharanam braja. And again, that's why Srila Prabhupada calls Bhagavad Gita as it is, because Bhagavad Gita creates faith. And faith means surrender. If you say, I believe in Krishna, sometimes it's very common, you go to some Christian and say, I'm already saved because I believe in Christ. And you ask them, what does it mean that you believe in Christ? They said, nothing, I just believe in Him. It means that I believe in Him. They think that belief, faith, is some mental disposition. But faith is not a mental disposition. It has to manifest externally. And the external sign of faith, how you can say that I have faith or not, is the extent of your surrender to the Lord. And surrender means to do whatever is pleasing to the Lord and not to do anything which is displeasing to the Lord. This is the first condition of surrender. If before doing something, you think whether this action will be pleasing to the Lord or it will be displeasing to the Lord, and you decide accordingly, not according to your own interest, not according to your profit which you may gain by doing this way or that way. If the consideration is there whether the Lord will be pleased with this or not, according to what I know from Bhagavad Gita, from other scriptures, then you're surrendered. But if your way of thinking is the same as we usually think, what will be the benefit for me, for my own personal interest, then you're not surrendered. You're not even following the first condition of surrender. Anukulyasya sankalpa, pratikulyasya varjanam. If you always feel that you're protected by the Lord, if you really feel that there is a protection of the higher force, which is next to you all the time, then you're surrendered. But if you feel that you have to fight for yourself, then why Krishna should be concerned with you? You are, you're protecting yourself. If you feel that the doctors will protect you, that your money will protect you, that your nice house on the Bay Area will protect you, or your nice car, or policeman, the police will, government, social security. All these considerations are there, and you ultimately think that this is all the means of your protection. You're not surrendered. Deep inside our heart, we have to understand that we're vulnerable in this material world. No matter how much we try, how intelligent we are, how clever we are, how much we try to gain some secure position in this world, if we don't really understand that the only security is coming from God, like it is said in American currency, in God we trust, but money is very important. In God we trust, but the more money we have, the better it is. So, this is not really the trust in God. When you trust in God, you're not really interested in obtaining or accumulating some other means which will create some sort of false security in your life. So that's the whole idea of Bhagavad Gita, and therefore Prabhupada has 100% rights to call his Bhagavad Gita as it is. His purpose is to create faith and to invoke the spirit of surrender, which is the original purpose of Krishna himself. Because the whole Bhagavad Gita, if we analyze very meticulously what Bhagavad Gita starts with surrender. When Arjuna says, Karpanya dosha pahata svabhava, prichhami tvam dharma samuda cheta, yachreyasyah nishchitam bruhitan vishishyasteham sadhimam tvam prapannam. I am prapanna, I am surrendered soul. You please teach me and tell me what I should do, because I'm confused. I don't know what to do. I don't know what is Dharma, what I am supposed to do in this horrible battle. You please tell me, and I will do. Please tell me very definitely what I should do. So this is the beginning of Bhagavad Gita. Because immediately after that, Krishna starts Bhagavad Gita. Before, he was not going to start Bhagavad Gita. He was very reserved. He chastised Arjuna. He said, you're just weakling and you're just eunuch. You don't understand anything. You're just talking highly sounding words, but actually you're a fool. That's exactly what Krishna says. But he was not going to teach him Bhagavad Gita, but when he feels like Srila Prabhupada explains in this purport that the example of how to understand Bhagavad Gita is presented in Bhagavad Gita itself. The figure of Arjuna, his way of doing this is surrendering. So surrendering is the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, and surrendering is the end of Bhagavad Gita. Sarva dharman prityaja mamekam sharanam vraja. And in between, Krishna always says this, Daivihesha gunamai mama maya durateya mamavaya prapadyante. Whoever this illusory energy is very difficult to overcome, because it's Daivi, it's divine. It's my energy. It's divine energy. So how you can understand, how you can overcome something which is divine, which is totally beyond your capacity of dealing with even, But whoever mamavaya prapadyante mamavaya prapadyante mayamatam tarantite. He will cross over this material energy. Very easily he will cross over this material energy. So this whole Bhagavad Gita, beginning, middle, and end, is about this. Is to invoke in us trust in God. That He is there. He is not some mythological figure. He is not some, hero of the past. He is present right here. He is, in fact, right in front of us. He is Radha Madan Mohan. He is standing here, and he is in a very relaxed posture, playing flute. And actually, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he used to say that this last verse of Bhagavad Gita, Sarva Dharman Prityaja, is the call of Krishna's flute. When Krishna, under the Vamshivat, under the banyan tree in Vrindavan, is calling gopis to come to him, and these gopis, they are giving up all their duties. In real sense, they're really giving up all their duties and running towards Krishna. Krishna is actually playing in his flute. He's saying, Sarva Dharman Parityaja Mamekam Sharanam Raja. And because they understand the sound of Krishna's flute, they did what he said. And that's exactly what he wants us to do. This is the intention, the original intention of Krishna, to give us this sense of understanding what we are supposed to do in our life. And this is very beautifully shown throughout the whole Bhagavad Gita, but perhaps, there are so many important verses and important chapters of Bhagavad Gita, but one of the most important chapters to understand Bhagavad Gita is the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Because if we don't understand the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we will miss the whole point. And usually people, they just, they kind of browse through the first chapter. And even some great acharyas, they didn't even comment on the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Because in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna doesn't say a word. Krishna starts speaking from the second chapter, from the second verse of the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And then the real Bhagavad Gita starts from the 11th verse of the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. But why the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita is so important? Because in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, in a very roundabout way, but at the same time in a very beautiful way, our problem is being explained. And unless we understand clearly the problem, we will never be able to understand the solution which is given by Krishna. In real sense, we can understand the solution, we can appreciate the solution and understand how to apply the solution in our life if we understand the problem, and if we understand that this problem which Arjuna experiences and graphically exposes or graphically shows in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, or Krishna shows actually, demonstrates this problem, is our problem. In the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, he points out in a very painful way, he basically points out in the heart of his problem, he says, Hrid Daurbalyam. He says, the weakness of the heart. How, Arjuna, you're so powerful. You're boasting all the time that you're so powerful. I'm the most powerful. I will kill all the soldiers which are there within just a few days. And, Krishna arranges this whole drama in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita just to show to us, to demonstrate to us that no matter how much we are trying to project ourselves, and the tendency in this material world is that to project ourselves as somebody who is very strong. It's not only Arjuna who is boasting himself that I can solve all these problems. Every one of us is of the same mentality. I'm so intelligent. I'm so rich. I have so many different virtues, and anyway, somehow or other, I will make a solution to all my problems. And Krishna brings Arjuna to the battlefield of Kurukshetra. and he really exposes him. He really brings out of him all his weaknesses, which are there within our heart. We're weak people. We may pretend, we may pose ourselves, project ourselves as somebody who is strong, but in reality we are weak. And this first chapter of Bhagavad Gita explains what is the cause of our weakness. Unless and until we understand what is the real cause of our weakness, of our problems in this material life, we will never be able to appreciate the solution which Krishna gives. In reality, we can only understand if we honestly admit that, yes, I'm also weak. And why we are weak? The first verse of Bhagavad Gita shows this weakness. Mama kah pandavaschaiva kima kurvata sanjaya. Srila Prabhupada points out in the purport, what is the cause of our weakness? Material attachments. Material attachments makes us blind. As Prabhupada will say further in Bhagavad Gita, that Dhritarashtra was blind, but not only physically blind, he was spiritually blind. What is blinding us? What is this blindness which is common, which is actually, throughout the world? Everyone is blind. Why we are blind? Because we are materially attached. And these material attachments makes us blind. They make us blind because we really cannot overcome these material attachments, and we don't see beyond these attachments. What Krishna is showing in this first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, he is showing how the material attachment is the root cause of all our problems. How the material attachments is actually the cause of all the violence which is there in the world. It's amazing when you superficially read the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And many people superficially do read the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And, because they don't understand the idea of the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, they cannot really understand because, they say Arjuna is so nice. He's ready to give up, fighting, and he's ready to surrender, and he's a non-violent guy, and here's this bad Krishna who is standing in front of him and say, fight, fight, fight. And most of the people, they have this crazy idea about Bhagavad Gita. They don't understand anything because they don't understand this first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. But in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, actually what Krishna shows, he shows that so-called compassion of Arjuna. Because, and this is very difficult to understand because we're all very compassionate, right? We all like Arjuna, very compassionate. Sometimes we become so compassionate, it's just unbelievable. But in reality, Krishna says, it's not compassion. Because the so-called compassion which you have is coming from your passion. You're not compassionate, you're passionate. You're attached. Krishna is very clearly showing by making Arjuna speak honestly what is there in his heart. Arjuna is very honestly and with very simple heart, because the very word Arjuna means simple-hearted. Arjuna means straightforward, from the root rij, which means straight. Arjuna is straight, Arjuna is honest. And that's his glory. The glory, and this is again a very important lesson of this first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. You can only overcome your problem if you are honest. And of course, honest doesn't mean you're completely honest, because in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is trying to justify his weakness of the heart by all these arguments which sound very convincing, I'm very concerned, I'm a good person of a society, what will happen with all these women and with all the progeny, and we all go to hell and this and that. And Krishna is just, standing there and nodding his head. And he said, yeah, I have heard it so many times. Because whenever we have a weakness of the heart, weak moment, the instinct, the natural instinct, the natural idea is to try to justify our weakness by camouflaging it and trying to present it as some virtue. That's exactly what Arjuna is doing. But you cannot really fool Krishna. Krishna is not easily fooled. He says in the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita that out of all means of cheating, I am the greatest cheater. So you cannot really cheat the greatest cheater. So Arjuna is trying to cheat Krishna. But still he is honest. He is honest in the sense that he openly admits, he just speaks out about his weaknesses. Yes, he's trying to cover them up by different means, but still, nevertheless, he's doing it in an open way. He's not afraid. This greatest warrior who was praised by everyone at that time, he's just, he openly says he's not trying to hide his fear. He manifests his fear openly, and that's his glory. If we understand that we are fearful inside, then we can only find a solution for this fear. If we don't understand that we are fearful, we will not even seek the solution, real solution for this fear. We will try to find some artificial solution for this problem. Krishna is showing in this first chapter of Bhagavad Gita 3 different strategies of how to deal with fear, 2 of which are totally unsuccessful. The first example of fear is Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra is fearful. Srila Prabhupada is explaining in the purport that Dhritarashtra is just saying Dharma Kshatriya, Kuru Kshatriya, oh, Hare Krishna. What is going to happen in this Dharma Kshatriya, in this pious holy place? How this pious holy place will influence my sons and the sons of Pandu. Naturally, by the presence in this holy place, they will feel very strong, and my sons will be very weak, because that's the nature of the holy place. The holy place strengthening gives the additional strength to virtuous people and makes impious, sinful people very insecure. So he expresses his fear, but his way of dealing with the fear is he's not really dealing with the fear. He's paralyzed. And that's a very common reaction, our reaction during fearful situations. Sometimes we become stunned. We don't know what to do, and we like an ostrich try to put our head in the sand. Did somebody behave this way sometimes in his life? Let us not do anything, maybe this cruel fate will not notice me if I become completely like immovable living entity. So Dhritarashtra is paralyzed. He's not doing anything. He's just worried. Sometimes what we do when we are in a critical situation, when some crisis comes upon us, we just become worried and worried and worried and not doing anything. That's a natural response in tamagun. Those people who are tamasic, the influence of tamas makes us paralyzed when we're dealing with difficult situation. And then the next, Sanjaya is showing how Dhritarashtra is dealing with, how Duryodhana is dealing with this situation. And Duryodhana is a typical representative of Rajagun. And when you're dealing with this situation and you are Rajasic, you're trying to, manipulate people, you're trying to acquire as many supporters as possible, you're trying to instigate the hatred in them. It's typical propaganda way of doing this. Like, nowadays propaganda is so prominent. And what propaganda is doing is just basically invoking in you certain emotions which will be helpful for those people who are arranging this, to channelize this emotion in a certain way. The propaganda is invoking fear sometimes invoking anger in you, just to do something what they want you to do. Like now this war is going on. And that's exactly what propaganda is doing. Just become angry, more angry, more angry, more angry. Kill, 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 kill. So this is what it is. And that's exactly what Duryodhana is doing. When Duryodhana is coming, Sanjaya, when Dhritarashtra is asking, what did they do, my sons and sons of Pandu, when they came together in this holy place, Dharmakshetre, Kurukshetre, Samaveta, Yuyutsavaha, desiring to fight, then Sanjaya immediately says that Raja, the king, the politician, very clever politician, Duryodhana, he goes by foot directly to whom? To Dronacharya. Why to Dronacharya? Why to Dronacharya? He is not the commander-in-chief. If he wants to, to speak with the commander-in-chief, he should go to Bhishma. No, he goes to Dronacharya. Why? Because he wants to flatter him. Why? Because he knows that Dronacharya has a soft corner in his heart for Arjuna, and Arjuna is his favorite disciple, and he really wants to instigate Dronacharya. He says, Bhishma will fight, no problem, let's motivate Dronacharya to do it. And he's doing it by going by foot. When the great king or, ruler of the country is going by foot to somebody, let's say, Joe Biden is coming to you, to your house and knocks on your door. Will you be flattered? I need your advice, So that's exactly what Duryodhana is doing. He's flattering Dronacharya. He's flattering. He's manipulating. He has this political mind, and he's trying to, manipulate people to do what he wants them to do, instead of doing dharma, instead of, inspiring them to do the proper thing, the right thing. He is just. Hare Krishna. There is some illusion is going on. So that's the second example, when he just boasting and at the same time betrays his concern and his fear. He's also fearful. Why he's doing this? Because he's fearful inside. He's totally, completely fearful, and he's not at all sure about the outcome. And why he's fearful? Because he knows that he is wrong. All people who are doing wrong things, who are creating sinful activities, they are fearful inside. If you want to be relatively fearless in this material world, at least try to understand what is morality, what is dharma, what is the law of nature, which is being explained here. So Sanjaya, from the very beginning, he shows how fearful is Duryodhana. And then, of course, Arjuna, who is in the beginning is very, enthusiastic, and he says, I'm ready to kill all the sons of Dhritarashtra. Please show me what they're doing, show them to me. all of a sudden he sees all his material attachments. And by seeing these material attachments and understanding that he will have to kill all these material attachments, he becomes extremely fearful. Externally, he is more fearful than Dhritarashtra. Externally, he is more fearful than Duryodhana. But again, his glory is that he's not trying to hide his fear. Actually, Dhritarashtra is much more fearful. Duryodhana is even much more fearful than Dhritarashtra because he knows he's wrong. And therefore, he's very fearful. And of course, Dhritarashtra is very fearful because he knows that he's wrong and that his sons are wrong and that he's actually doing something illegal. So they both, the three of these people, they have fear. And the reason of this fear is one, material attachments. Dhritarashtra manifests these material attachments, mamakah pandavaschaiva. They are mine, and this is Pandavas. They're opposite. You know, Duryodhana is definitely showing his material attachments by all this means of manipulation, by always calculating who is attached to whom. You know, this Dronacharya, he is attached to Arjuna, so we have to make some, quarrel between them, and, this... and by the way, I have also to instigate Dronacharya to fight because he's foolish enough to teach Drishtadyumna about the means of his being, how he could be killed, and so many other things. He's fearful because of the attachments. And Arjuna is openly fearful because of the same reason, because of the attachments. Whenever we are materially attached, we will be fearful. And surrender to the Lord means to solve this root cause of all our problems, which is the material attachment. The only way, the only means to really conquer over material attachments. And by the means of conquering over material attachments, we are conquering over our false ego and ignorance. Because the material attachments is a result of ignorance. Avidya, asmita, raga and dvesha. Raga and dvesha is the direct, twin sisters or whatever, maybe sister and brother, I don't know how exactly, but, Raga is definitely feminine, but Dvesha is probably masculine. So anyway, the false ego gives birth to these nice twins, Raga and Dvesha. And this is exactly what is being demonstrated in the first chapter. This is the root cause of all problems. And it manifests differently, but, somewhat honest people who are more under the influence of sattva guna. And Arjuna is the representative of sattvic person because the very vivid and direct sign of sattva guna is that you're honest. Sharalata. And it's not even the characteristic of Kshatriya. The Kshatriya Swabhav, the Kshatriya nature, they're not really open. But Arjuna is showing this because he wants to teach us how we can really solve this problem. We have to be very open that we have problem. We have to admit very honestly, I have problem. It's not that she has problem or he has problem or they all have problem. And because they have problem, they're attacking me. No, they can only attack me, and I can only, be very sensitive to their attacks if I have my problems inside. The problems are there. There is a saying, if you point out somebody's problem by your nice finger, the three fingers show the real cause of all the problems. By one finger you show, somebody else, but three fingers tell the truth. The cause of the problem is inside. And that's fear, and the fear is caused by the attachments. And anger is also caused by the attachment. Anger and fear, anger and attachment, it's the same thing. If you have attachment, you will have anger. Because anger is the weapon against somebody who is trying to deprive you of something which you are attached for. If you are attached to something, then you will use, and somebody is bold enough or dares somehow or other to encroach upon your attachments, then you say, I will show you. And actually, the point here, very beautiful point, which we really have to clearly understand, that unless we have attachments, we have false ego. And when we have false ego, it means that we're ignorant. The avidya is there. The real cause of all our sufferings in this material world is ultimately avidya, ignorance. Not understanding of our real nature, not understanding of our spiritual nature, of our connection with the Supreme Lord and our real function in this connection of the Supreme Lord. And when we have this avidya and we have false ego, then we will become violent at one point. Because if we have attachments, if we have avidya, then we will divide people. This is the friends and this is the enemies. This mentality, you cannot really get rid of this mentality unless you get rid of the ignorance. And if you have friends and enemies, you will do what? You will try to favor your friends and you will try to kill your enemies. You may be killing them physically, or you may be killing their reputation by blaspheming them in social media or whatever, but this violence, the root cause of violence, is ignorance. And Arjuna is demonstrating this ignorance. And Krishna, and at the same time he says, no, I'm very non-violent. And that's exactly what we all do. We have problem and we camouflage this problem. We try to cover it up by different means and trying to present this problem as some virtue. That's the problem. And Krishna knows. He says, because when you're attached to something, the next moment you will be hating this. There is, I don't know if there is this saying in English, but in Russian there is a saying, from love to hatred, there is only one step distance. There is only one step between the two. The attachment, what we call love in this material world is nothing but attachment. It's not love. Let's become honest. And today you love somebody, tomorrow you will hate the same person. And the more you love him today, the more you will hate him tomorrow. This is how it works. This is what it is, because this is the twins. This is two sides of the same coin. Raga and Dvesha, Ichha and Dvesha. Attachment and hatred which you have in the heart. And unless you have this attachment, you will have hatred in your heart, and until the time you eradicate ignorance, you will have attachment and hatred, and it means that you will apply violence. So what this first chapter of Bhagavad Gita is showing is that Arjuna is really violent, although he is trying to present himself as non-violent. And Krishna is not really non-violent. And he wants to free Arjuna from this violence which is deeply hidden within our heart. Within Arjuna's heart, of course, Arjuna has no problem. Arjuna is just very beautifully playing the role Krishna wants him to play. But the problem is ours. We have hatred within our heart. We have attachments within our heart. And we are trying to deal with it in different ways. But the only proper way of dealing with all these problems and attachments which are there within our heart is how Krishna teaches Arjuna. Everything else will fail, you know. Every other means which we try to adopt to solve this very difficult problem will fail. You know, like now, as I said, war is going on. What is the cause of this war? False ego. Ultimately, ignorance. Ignorance. And, you know, we in our little sect, we have so much fighting internally also. I don't know, maybe your beautiful community is an exception, but everywhere else where I go, people are fighting with each other. Why? Because, again, friends and enemies. When Prahlad Maharaj heard about this friend and enemy mentality, he was so surprised. He said, I heard that people think like this, but I never really believed that they think like this. Why? Because he was above this. He was transcendental to this, because he was attached to God. You know, our real function of attachment is attachment to God. We should apply our attachment by being attached to God and His representative, to spiritual master, to Srila Prabhupada, to somebody who is really manifesting these qualities of attachment to God. If we want to develop this attachment to God, we have to serve somebody who has attachment to God. There is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way. This is the only way to learn how to be attached to God. Otherwise, we will be naturally, by our svabhava, by our inborn nature, attached to material things and material people, material ideas, material conceptions, and we will not really understand what is the soul. We will think that, there are some Republican souls and democratic souls, who are fighting with each other, or some other crazy conception and ideas will come to our mind. Inevitably, in a very natural way, spontaneous way, because that's the way we are. And Krishna is teaching us. Krishna is teaching us how to gradually, first by theoretically understanding that I am not this body. It's a very significant step in the right direction. Just theoretically understand, I was a small child, I was a youth, I was an adult, now I'm an old man, but somehow or other I don't feel it like this. I'm the same. Like recently we spoke with one devotee, he said, I always feel as if I am 14 years old, and he's 60. Yeah. And that's true, Even to understand it theoretically or by this logic, by this important logic, if we understand this logic, that already gives us a lot of proper understanding of how we should behave. That we should really, by understanding it theoretically, we should seek the means of how to understand it in reality, so that we will be completely fearless at the end of the day. What we should do to free ourselves from fear, People are so confused in this material world nowadays that they don't really even understand that, I'm not this body. It's such a difficult concept for people to understand. I remember once I was in a train, and somehow or other I couldn't sleep because, Russian trains are not very nice place to be, and, so many strange activities are going on. So I was there in this aisle, sitting, trying to chant. And many people were sleeping, but one completely drunken person was also going back and forth in this aisle. So I thought, let me preach to him. It was a brilliant idea which came upon me at midnight. So and I tried to communicate with him, and actually he first became somewhat curious, and he said, "What are you doing? Why you're sitting?" You know, and I asked him, "Why you're, you know, passing by back and forth?" And he started asking me some questions. "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm changing, you know, names of God." He said, "For what?" And I said, because I'm soul." He said, "Soul? What? What do you mean?" You know, and I decided to, you know, to exercise Krishna's logic upon him. I said, "My dear sir, you are not this body, you're spirit soul, and the proof is that, you know, you were a small child, and then you grew a little bit and a little more, and now you're, you know, adult who is very drunk. So, you know, isn't it you were the same person? You know, when you were a small child and then you grew a little bit, and weren't you the same person? Don't you feel that you're the same?" And he became really puzzled. For a long time he was thinking, you know, and by, you know, making some face, and then he said, no, I was not the same person. No. When I was a child, it was not me. He couldn't relate to this, even to this idea at all. You know. But for those who are not really habituated to drink some alcohol, they may understand this. And then gradually, Krishna develops this philosophy to give us the complete conviction that this is the way to live. Bhagavad Gita is an amazing book which formulates the universal laws of nature, which are equally applicable to our material life and to spiritual life. Bhagavad Gita is not only talking about the spiritual laws, how we should behave in spiritual life, but so many seminars are there, Bhagavad Gita and management. You know, Krishna definitely didn't have in mind, you know, Google Corporation by speaking Bhagavad Gita, you know. But you can successfully apply the principles of Bhagavad Gita in management. Why? Because Krishna is teaching universal laws in Bhagavad Gita. And if you understand these universal laws, you will be equally successful in this material life and ultimately in a spiritual life. And that's exactly the idea of Bhagavad Gita. Of course, I cannot go further. I have already overdue my time, so I have to finish now. But again, my initial point was that the idea of Krishna, who was trying to speak Bhagavad Gita, is to create faith. And surrender means faith. Surrender, sharanagati, sharanapati, prapannata, it's all synonymous for faith. This is how real faith, real shraddha, not just some external conventional shraddha manifests. The real shraddha manifests in the way we surrender. Surrender to God and His representative, trying to follow what they say. And this surrender is a gradual process. And actually, it's being shown again very beautifully in Bhagavad Gita how initial surrender, which is invoked, the spirit of surrender, initial spirit of surrender, which invoked by facing so many problems, is gradually being matured during the process of our spiritual practice, how we become more and more surrendered until we reach the highest ideal of surrender, which is manifested beautifully in the gopis of Vrindavan, who are completely surrendered to the Lord. So it's a huge field of activity. From initial surrender, which is very conditional surrender. Arjuna's surrender, initial surrender, is very conditional. He says, I'm your disciple and the soul surrendered unto you, Nayatsya iti Govinda, but I'm not going to fight. You can teach me anything else, but don't tell me to fight. You know, that's his initial surrender. Till he says, you know, that Nashta moha smritir labdva karishye vachanam tava, my illusion is completely cleared up, and I will do whatever you tell me to do. So that's the idea. And Prabhupada, by writing this beautiful edition of Bhagavad Gita, he's explaining, and he's basically explaining to any person, any lay person who will take this book and will overcome the initial resistance by reading Dhritarashtra Uvacha, because that's the first obstacle in understanding Bhagavad Gita. When somebody who doesn't know who is Dhritarashtra is trying to pronounce this word, he faces the first very severe difficulty in a spiritual path. But if he overcomes this initial difficulty, then God knows what will happen to him. Maybe he will come here. So, because now is marathon time, Christmas marathon, and now this Bhagavad Gita should be distributed. I was trying to glorify Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki.
I'm not sure we want to stop this most successful and perhaps the largest in history therapy session here in Silicon Valley. Because even I am considering surrendering after hearing that. We're deeply grateful, Maharaj, for you bringing us so clearly the purpose of the Bhagavad Gita in about an hour and 15 minutes. It was amazing. I have a brief question, and that is that you had mentioned how Krishna makes arrangements even when we have daunting tasks before us or problems, and then he already has to figure out as we surrender that he makes the arrangement, he has to worry about it. Can you say a few words about us since you brought it up, the marathon? And just now we're in the throes of trying to reach our goals, which typically seem out of reach. Yet we also have faith because we've seen it over and over again, and we never know how it happens, but we do. We have always reached them. This time seems different, though, as all the other times do too. Could you say just a few words to encourage the devotees here who are putting their heart and soul into reaching a goal? Our goal right now is to distribute at least 66,000 Bhagavad Gitas in the next couple of weeks. And perhaps you could just say something. What is it like for a person who's unacquainted with the Bhagavad Gita, walking down the street somewhere and receiving one? What goes through that person's mind, and what should we be thinking to cooperate with Krishna and reach the goal?
Well, I'm not a big book distributor. I have to admit it. But Krishna says, Srila Prabhupada explains in Bhagavad Gita that the only function of the soul is to desire. The rest is being done by somebody else. So the only thing which we can do is to cultivate desire. And if this desire is pure, then Krishna will reciprocate with this desire. You know, we have so many material desires within our heart, but if for a change we have some spiritual desire, then Krishna will be totally, completely ecstatic by smelling this spiritual desire within our heart. Srila Prabhupada explains that the desire is something like the smell or fragrance of a flower which you can feel from a distance. So Krishna is not really in touch with us, but he feels the smell of our desires. And usually it's not a fragrance, it's a stink of our desires. But when we have this beautiful desire, I want to please you, I want to please Srila Prabhupada, I want to really manifest his compassion to the fallen conditioned souls. Because as I explained in my little talk, the real compassion is only possible when you're not identifying with this body. And Srila Prabhupada is writing his Bhagavad Gita from this platform. And Bhagavad Gita is the manifestation of his compassion, real compassion, not the false compassion which we sometimes manifest in our life. So if I understand this, that I have a beautiful chance to manifest Srila Prabhupada's compassion to these souls of this world, and have desire, the rest Krishna will arrange. Krishna is there in everyone's heart, in the heart of a person whom we approach by offering him this Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna will make arrangements. He will give us intelligence what to say and how to approach him and what not to say. And even if we say something completely stupid, it doesn't really matter, because Krishna will cover it up and, and will give this person the idea that there is something special. Actually, there was one very beautiful devotee in Moscow. His name was Radhikaraman. He unfortunately died very young. He was from the snake bite in Yamuna River. It's an amazing arrangement. He was so pure-hearted. So he was a big book distributor in Moscow, and he was just, approaching people and just smiling at them and being very friendly, sincerely friendly from the heart. And people were so touched by his sincerity and friendliness. Then some 7 or even 8, 9 years later, people would still come to the temple and asking, where is he? I met this beautiful person on the street. And he touched my heart, and I still remember this person whom I met on the street. So it's not a question of tricks like, or techniques. It's a question of having very sincere desire to please Srila Prabhupada and to help him to manifest his compassion. And that's what we want, what we can cultivate. The desire we can cultivate by listening, hearing others, how they speak, their experiences. We can really, because desires are by nature contagious. When we hear somebody who has very strong desire to distribute Prabhupada's books, we become infected by his desire to do it. So, and yes, it's absolutely impossible, but as Srila Prabhupada said, impossible is the word of the Fool's Dictionary. So, yes, it's impossible, but we will anyway do it, no problem.